right. Hi, everybody. It's 12:10. We might have a few more people jump in here, but we will go ahead and get started. I want to say welcome to Book Sandwiched In. My name is Tara, and I work with the Friends on behalf of the library. Thank you for joining us either for the first time today or again if you were here with us last week. This is our first summer Book Sandwiched In program and our first virtual Book Sandwiched In program. So we hope that you guys enjoy this format while the libraries remain closed. A quick word about the Friends of the Library. The Friends are a membership organization for anybody who loves our libraries and wants to give a show of support to the library. They have been putting on Book Sandwiched In for over 50 years now, along with a lot of other wonderful programs. So if you are interested in more information about the Friends or you'd like to join, you can go to tulsalibrary.org/friends and you can do that there. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Carly now.
Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Carly, and I work at Central Library in the Adult Services Department. If you hear distinct banging in the background, that is my dogs. I have to put them outside, otherwise they will interrupt me while I'm presenting. So as you can see today, I'm going to be talking about The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I picked this book because it's very unique and it's all about storytelling. So I figured everyone that would be watching this is going to be an avid reader and likes stories. So I picked this book for that reason. So with that, I will get started. Some facts about this book and the author. So Erin Morgenstern, aside from being an author, is a multimedia artist and she has a degree in theater. Her first book is The Night Circus, which was published in 2011, and it was a New York Times bestseller. It's actually been published in 37 languages, and it won the annual Locus Award for Best First Novel. And then fast forward for 9 years, and then she published The Starless Sea, which was published in November of last year. This book received several high-star reviews and things like Library Journal, Entertainment Weekly, and Time. And Erin Morgenstern's writing style is probably one of the most unique. Her books have a lot of fantasy and magical realism, and her prose is very lyrical, and it's easy to kind of get lost in the words because they are very pretty. So a summary of the book, for those of you who haven't read it, Zachary Rollins, the main character, discovers a mysterious book in his campus library, and he finds that the book actually contains a story about himself, and it's a story from his childhood that he's never told anybody before. So this, of course, freaks him out, and so he is determined to track down the original owner of this book, which introduces him to two of the side characters, Dorian and Maribel. So in trying to track down this book, he actually goes to the Starless Sea and finds that it's a place that exists underground with a huge labyrinth of tunnels, and all of the rooms in this underground world have books, and they're filled with stories. And come to find out that the fate of this place, the Starless Sea, is under threat. And then Zachary kind of gets pulled into this uncertainty and finds that his own fate is entwined with the fate of the Starless Sea. This book has lots of different stories in it. There's pirates and lovers and stories about the moon, and it feels like anything is possible in this world. About some of the main characters. So you have Zachary Rollins, who's 24. He's majoring in emerging media, specifically video games, which is an important point that I'll bring up again in a couple slides. Dorian is kind of a mystery. He is a storyteller, and that's really all we know about him at the beginning of the book. And then Maribel is kind of the same. We don't really know much about her either, except that she's from the Starless Sea. And this book is kind of about the experience, and you're supposed to figure out more about the characters as you go along, and that's just kind of the fun of this book. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about this book, I realized that everything I wanted to say, I couldn't really say without addressing the purpose of this book. And the purpose of this book is the importance of storytelling. Morgenstern wrote this book as a love letter to storytelling, and it's a book for readers and people who love stories. And Morgenstern kind of explores myth and fairy tale meaning and fables to explore universal themes and concepts like seeking and finding, fate versus choice. And she does all of this in the name of storytelling and the things stories get us to think about. And there's a lot of nods to other works of literature in this book. For example, one of the locations in this book, called the Harbor, is a huge library, and it resembles the Library of Babel. I don't know how many of you know about that story, but basically the Library of Babel is a library in which every book, every story ever is there, which I think would be a really cool place to go to if it was real. So the first thing I want to talk about with this book is the composition. This book is extremely complicated and kind of confusing at times. So basically there's a mix of the main plot, and then you have short stories as well. So the short stories are books that are actually taken from the main plot that we see in the main plot. And there's 5 different sections in this book. So there's one short story compilation per section. So an example is Sweet Sorrows, which is talked about in the first section of this book. And it's the book that Zachary finds in the library. And so the really neat thing about this book is that Zachary reads this book, but we also get to read the short stories that Zachary reads. So you kind of get to compare your thoughts about the short stories with the character's thoughts. You kind of see what he thinks about it, what you think about it, where you differ. And personally, I kind of like sleuthing and that type of thing, so that was a fun thing for me. And some of the characters that are introduced in Sweet Sorrows, like Time and Fate, are actually characters in the story, but you get to figure out who's who, so I also enjoyed that as well. And like I said, this book is complicated and it's not really grounded in reality. So for people who like straightforward plots, this is definitely a challenging read. And if I had to give a how to read this book, I think the author kind of gives you a clue in the book. This quote that says, "The rabbit hole. Do you want to know the secret to surviving once you've gone down the rabbit hole?" Zachary nods and Maribel leans forward. "Be the rabbit," she whispers. So I think essentially this is saying, you know, to read this book and to read stories, you have to be curious, and you don't always have to know where you're going to enjoy it. And definitely with Morgenstern's prose in this book, it's very confusing and it can be hard to understand, and that's okay. You don't have to understand everything about this book to enjoy it. Another fun fact about this book is that it's written like a video game, and that's why Zachary, being an emerging media major, is kind of important. He thinks that video games are stories, and so Morgenstern actually wrote this book like a role-playing video game. And for those of you who don't really play games, a role-playing video game is a game where you control the character and you make choices for the character that kind of affect how the story unfolds. And by making a certain choice, you also block off other options that you could have chosen. And so obviously books can't exactly be role-playing games because the author makes the choices for you and what the characters do. So realistically, it isn't a role-playing book. but it feels like it because Zachary has so many choices to make in this story. So, and it doesn't really feel like they're made for him. You actually feel Zachary deciding what to do, and you definitely get that feeling of the butterfly effect that you get in role-playing games. And this ties into my next point, which is fate versus choice. And this is one of the main conversations that's brought up in this book, or theme, or however you want to think about it. And I think this is best represented through doors, like literal doors. In this book, Zachary may be presented with like 5 doors, and he has to pick one door to go through, which will completely alter the story. So when Zachary picks a door to open, the author kind of makes you question whether he actually chooses that door or if he's fated to open the door that he chooses. So you have this, it's meant to be versus choose your own destiny conversation. And it was really interesting to think about. And I think these quotes that I found kind of highlight that conversation. And the first one is, "Do not be afraid. Our fate cannot be taken from us. It is a gift." So that kind of coincides with the it's meant to be. If you think a decision you make, it's just like, oh, it's meant to be, or it's not meant to be. And then the choose your own destiny kind of side of the conversation is best represented through this conversation Zachary is having with Mary Bell, which says, "You're here because you followed me. You didn't have to. You want to think that you did, or that you were supposed to, but you always had a choice." So for me, it was fun to kind of think about how I thought about that and whether I was in control of the things that happened in my life, or if the things that happened to me in life are fate. So that's one interesting thing that Morgenstern gets you to think about. And then another theme conversation is the concept of time. And this comes up in the Ballad of Simon and Eleanor, which is the compilation of short stories in the 3rd section of the book. And basically, to give you kind of a quick summary that doesn't really give anything away, Simon and Eleanor are 2 characters that meet in a room where time doesn't exist. And it was very difficult to wrap my head around, but a quote in the book kind of helped me understand and think about this. So the quote is, "Think of time as a river. The river flows in one direction. If there is an inlet along the river, the water within it does not flow the same way as the rest of the river." So you have like a river and then a little inlet, and they are both flowing at 2 different speeds. And obviously time is always flowing, but I feel that this book kind of brings up that at times it feels like it's going faster than other times when it's going slower. So if you're doing something you enjoy, or it goes by fast, but if you're doing something you don't like, it kind of goes by really slow. And I know for me, in the pandemic, thinking about time was interesting because it just feels like time doesn't exist anymore. So maybe that's why time stood out to me in this book. And like I said earlier, time is actually a character as well as fate. So it's kind of fun to figure out who is who. And some symbols. I wanted to talk about symbols because most stories have symbols. And I feel this book has a ton of symbols, but some of the ones that stood out to me are symbols that kind of embody storytelling, I think. So you have bees. I first need to say, Starless Sea has people with like 3 different roles. And so you have the acolytes who devote themselves to archiving. You have guardians who devote themselves to defending Starless Sea. And then you have keepers who kind of make keys and doors to actually enter the Starless Sea. And so the symbol for acolytes is bees. And I thought it was neat that Morgenstern created a group of people for archiving, because we all can appreciate archivists and how they preserve history and preserve stories, because that's really important. And then swords for the guardians. And I kind of think of this as people are defending stories, and we don't want stories to be censored. We don't want them to be taken away from us. So it's important to defend stories. And then you have the keepers. And I kind of think of keepers as writers and authors and storytellers, because they make keys and doors that allow us to explore different ideas and concepts and perspectives. And that's also another important aspect of storytelling. And then one of the most obvious ones that I kind of mentioned earlier was doors. They are representative of choice. And I kind of want to circle back around to the main theme, thesis of this book, which is the importance and beauty of storytelling. It's not just the purpose of this book, but it's also the theme. Throughout this book, you see that stories take us to new places, and they allow us to think about new ideas and have different kinds of conversations. They allow you to reflect on yourself and other people. They can give you a new direction or purpose, or they can support you in something that you're going through. We all have stories that mean a lot to us, and you don't have to understand everything about this book to enjoy it or take away stories that are meaningful to you. And I think that's one of the best things about storytelling, is that some don't really mean much to us, but we do have ones that do. We all have our favorite books. And with storytelling, you don't have to like this book, or you don't have to like all stories. What matters is that you find one that does mean something to you. And that's summed up. And I think one of the quotes that stood out to me the most is the one, not all stories speak to all listeners, but all listeners can find a story that does somewhere, sometime, in one form or another. And this quote just stood out to me because I love stories, and I hope you all love stories. I think you all love stories. And yeah, we all have stories that we just love and that can really influence us and the things we do in our lives. And I think that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to talk about. So I can open the floor for a Q&A. You can type the questions in the Q&A chat box below, and I will try to answer them to the best of my abilities.
All right, thank you, Carly. That was amazing. We have a few questions for you. So the first question is, how does this book compare to The Night Circus?
I actually can't answer that question because I haven't read The Night Circus yet, but I do know that it has a lot of similar elements as far as magical realism, and that the two stories take place in different worlds that are somewhat attached to reality, but also not really. And that they bring up different conversations and themes and things to think about. But yeah, I haven't read it, so I plan to, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
And the next question is, sounds like such a complicated book that it would deserve a second reading. Do you agree? And if so, why? If not, why as well?
I definitely think it needs more than one reading. I plan to read it again at some point because there are so many things that I know that I missed. So many symbols, so many different connections within the stories. And so I definitely think this is one that needs to be reread, and that you'll probably take something new out of it each time you read it. And I've heard the same for The Night Circus.
And did the author do the art in the book?
Actually, I'm not sure about that. That's something that I didn't even bother to look at. not sure. I don't know. I'll have to look that up because I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay, those are all the questions we have right now. Feel free to use either the chat or the Q&A if you have more questions.
Do we have the raise hand function on this?
We do. So you can also raise your hand. We have a raised hand. Let's see.
I was curious how many people read this book. I can't see, but if you would raise your hand, I would like to see how many people read it.
So far, we've got one hand raised.
That's okay. I think talking about this book and knowing what it's about and what to expect before reading it makes it much easier to read, because I personally did a bit of research on this book as far as what it was talking about, how it was written, and I think I got a lot more out of it because I did that. And if I had kind of went in blind, I think I would be extremely confused as to what was going on.
And then let's see, we have a few more things in the chat. Is there a resolution in this book, or are you left wondering?
I want to say yes and no. There is a main plot and things happen and the plot ends, but you have so many questions as to, is this what happened or is that what happened? And so the plot, I guess there is some resolution, but I was also left with a lot of questions, which is another reason why I think I would like to reread it to see if maybe I can figure a few more things out than I had the first time around.
And then we have a comment here from Carol. I just finished The Night Circus. It was good, but doesn't pull you in as quickly as The Starless Sea. Both books make you want to reread to pick up clues you missed before.
Definitely. And I haven't read The Night Circus, but I also felt like The Starless Sea, it did take a little bit for me to kind of get pulled in. But like I said, I think this book is about the experience and you don't exactly have to know where you're going. And that's kind of like if you're sitting around like a campfire or someone and someone's telling a story and it's like a myth or something that doesn't really make sense, but you just kind of go with it and see where it takes you.
We have a couple more comments about Ellen hasn't read it yet, but after your description, she's excited to. And then Carol says you did a great job and this is a wonderful book, but you're right, it is hard to explain and helps to know what you're getting into.
I'm glad you all found the presentation helpful because I had a hard time clarifying what I wanted to talk about and saying it in a way that makes sense. So I'm glad that it kind of did.
Okay, any more questions? That was a very great job, Carly. I have read it and there is a lot to it. So you did a good job condensing it.
Thank you. Okay. I don't think there's any more questions.
No, I think we're good.
Okay. I guess we will end it here. I thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the presentation or got something out of it. And I hope that you all enjoy the rest of your day.